The city of Tampa is best known for its sports teams and perfect weather. But the Florida sunshine can hide some dark secrets. And for one lottery winner, a sensational change of fortune would ultimately become a Shakespearean tragedy. With a population of over 3 million, the city of Tampa and the surrounding Bay Area attracts people from all walks of life.
The residents there are eclectic. There is a distinct flavor because of the different businesses and restaurants that exist. The entrepreneur spirit is flourishing.
But today's Tampa isn't the same as the one many in its black community grew up in.
When I was growing up at the end of World War II, we had Central Avenue. Black commerce thrived there. All your professionals lived in the same community. And we had our community schools. So it was that neighborhood raising children. Great place to grow up. All of a sudden, they started busing our kids out of the neighborhood. That's when things started sliding societal for people of color, and I believe for people of the whole community.
Some decided to move out to nearby towns like Plant City and Lakeland, establishing new communities and new opportunities.
Because Lakeland is centrally located in what we would call a super region, within 1 hour you have access to almost 7 million people.
Growing up, when you ran into people around the state and you told them you were from Lakeland, particularly people of color, they knew right away where it was, because it was one of the main concert stops in the mid-'70s and late '70s and early '80s.
There were so many citrus groves that were here. You know, it was a bustling citrus community.
But the slower pace of Central Florida doesn't keep crime at bay. It can find you anywhere, even in a town like Lakeland. And for one well-known resident, his local prominence made him a target. On November 9th, 2009, a man named Cedric Edom walks into the Polk County Sheriff's Department to file a missing persons report. His cousin, 43-year-old Abraham Shakespeare, has disappeared.
He told the missing persons unit that no one has heard from him for 6 or 7 months, and he was concerned for him.
In my career of 25 years as a private investigator, I have never heard of somebody for 6 months being unreported and nobody knows anything about what's happening with this person. I've never heard of that.
Cedric explains that the family thought Abraham was away on an extended cruise, but recently discovered that wasn't the case. It wouldn't have been that unusual. Abraham could afford such a vacation, having won the lottery a few years earlier.
He didn't show up. They didn't hear anything from him. Like, he didn't call me anything. Then I suspect something was wrong.
Abraham Shakespeare hadn't always been a member of Lakeland's elite. He'd grown up in a working-class neighborhood outside the city.
Mr. Shakespeare was a very quiet, hardworking individual, one that was raised in an environment by his mother that taught him a hard work ethic.
He did not have any formal education. He was illiterate and didn't understand it really even how to read or write. He could sign his name, but that's about it.
He would go out and do little yard work and stuff like that.
I remember a time we didn't even have a lawnmower. We just had 2 rakes. And we left and we went and raked people's leaves. And that's how we made money.
As an adult, that work ethic helped Abraham overcome his lack of education.
He would go to the local grocery store and sweep the parking lots or, vacuum floors or whatever he had to do to make ends meet.
He wasn't the brightest, but a heart of gold is what he's always carried.
Abraham had a son in 2001, but his relationship with the child's mother didn't last. He did his best to support the child while he was living with his mother.
He lived here with me. Abraham was just a person, just mostly to himself. He didn't have a car to take me any place. If we went out somewhere to eat, we had to go on the city bus.
He was happy with taking care of his mother and just living paycheck to paycheck.
But his life changed forever on November 15th, 2006.
Abraham Shakespeare was traveling with his colleague. He worked for a trucking company, and they stopped at a convenience store in the east side of the county. And Abraham didn't want to get out of the car, and he told Michael Ford to purchase a lottery ticket for him.
They went and did their route. They came back. And it wasn't basically until a day or so later that Abraham realized he actually had the winning ticket.
He won approximately, I believe it was over $30 million in the 2006 Florida lottery, which after taxes and taking the payout equated to about $17 million.
Overnight, Abraham's life changed completely.
He didn't let money change him. The only evidence of him being wealthy was the BMW that he drove and the $1 million home that he lived in.
But his newfound fortune didn't come without conflict.
A couple of months after Shakespeare won the lottery, Michael Ford filed a lawsuit claiming that he stole the ticket from him.
The Polk County Sheriff's Office pretty much conducted an extensive investigation to prove otherwise, and it can never be determined, from what I remember, if they were actually stolen by Abraham Shakespeare or not.
Abraham's sudden reversal of fortunes changed his life in other ways as well.
The pressures that you're going to entail from winning the lottery, I think it was a blessing and a curse.
Money makes people look at you differently. I don't care who you are. You could be a mud duck. Somebody gonna look at you when you got that money.
He would hang out at a local club with one of his friends where he met his second child's mother, Centauria Butler.
When she came on the scene, she rolled up with another friend of his, and he literally fell in love with her. Centauria had gotten pregnant and had a kid.
But Abraham's newfound notoriety put a strain on the relationship.
These two was like cat and mouse, but when you got that money, Betty, Sue, Sally, Jane, and everybody else coming. And those was a lot of situations that Abraham was being a man. But Abraham loved her.
Abraham began to feel the pressure of his new wealth in all aspects of his life.
Winning the lottery absolutely makes anybody a target. He took a $17 million cash reward from the winnings. How do you deal with that? I mean, the guy had a 7th grade education, so I can't even imagine the pressure that he felt.
All of a sudden, you've got family members, you've got friends, you've got everybody pulling on you.
He probably bought 10 plus houses for friends and people that simply owed him a mortgage payment when they can make it.
I told him, I say, "Little bro, what you need to do is get out the ghetto with that kind of money. Because you right now is like a lamb around a bunch of hungry lions. And they're going to be trying to eat you every chance they can."
Now, just 3 years after winning the lottery, Abraham has suddenly vanished without a trace, and detectives are determined to find out why.
People wouldn't see him in his usual spots. They were curious and they wondered what was going on. Is he still in Lakeland? Did he really get tired of everybody? Did he finally disappear?
Located 40 miles east of Tampa is the city of Lakeland, Florida. And before his disappearance, it's the place Abraham Shakespeare called home.
When you go back a little further in Lakeland's history, it was largely dependent upon the agricultural and the phosphate industries. Didn't require anyone to have even a high school education to participate in those. And so a lot of the educated talent tended to leave the community.
There's been a major transition from the citrus industry back in the 80s to where we are now. This has become a distribution hub for major players worldwide. Companies have found themselves stationed here.
Lakeland's economic resurgence has made it a desirable location to live, and for Abraham, the place to reinvent himself.
There is a lot of wealth and distinct neighborhoods, such as the Christina area, as well as Lake Hollingsworth. And that's where Shakespeare would walk around and dream of one day being wealthy.
Abraham's dreams had come true. But as police begin the search for the missing millionaire, they learn that winning the lottery didn't quite turn out the way he hoped, and his new fortune was dwindling.
He even was known to have extravagant parties where he would, pay for food, alcohol, DJs. It was even rumored that he threw a party one time where he had $30,000+ in cash, and then he made it rain money in cash for all his party goers.
You got to remember, you go from $8 an hour on a job to now, you ain't got to work at all. His basic thing was that if I go broke tomorrow, I've done what I wanted to do.
Abraham Shakespeare, by 2009, just 3 years later, we estimated that he probably had $3 million left.
But was all of that enough to make him want to disappear? Abraham's cousin, who filed the missing persons report, doesn't think so.
Well, once we were first assigned to the case, of course, the first person that we wanted to talk to was Cedric.
Cedric lived in a house right in front of a lake that Abraham had purchased.
Cedric tells investigators there is a woman who recently came into Abraham's life, and he suspects that she had something to do with his disappearance. Her name is Dee Dee Moore. Abraham and Dee Dee first met through his real estate agent.
Dee Dee wanted to basically author a book about somebody finding success, somebody going from basically the average Joe to making it big and being successful.
She said, hey, I got the perfect person, and told her the story of Abraham Shakespeare winning the lottery. Through the process of meeting him, Dee Dee kind of realizes that his finances are in a mess and offers to Abraham, hey, I'm gonna, help you out with your finances.
Cedric Edom had an agreement with his cousin that he would pay the mortgage back. Well, when Cedric could no longer communicate with Abraham, he started making the payments through Dee Dee Moore.
His concern was that Dee Dee Moore all of a sudden shows up to collect a mortgage payment, and she doesn't really have a viable explanation as to where Abraham Shakespeare is.
But when officers speak to Dee Dee, she says that isn't true.
She says, hey, Abraham, he wants to be missing. He doesn't want to be found.
Abraham had gone on a vacation or somewhere to Jamaica. He was kind of trying to get away from it all because so many people were pulling on him, trying to get money.
Dee Dee even shows them a video she'd taken of Abraham just weeks before, where he talks about wanting to escape.
Do you get tired of people asking for money all the time, Abe?
They don't take no for an ounce, so.
He talked about how people would be lined up around the block at his mother's house, waiting for him. He had to change his cell phone number several different times.
He had just had it with the pressure of being a lottery winner. He just wanted to disappear. So he was safe and sound.
I wouldn't have felt comfortable either if somebody would bother me about money like that.
In fact, Dee Dee seems to think Cedric has an ulterior motive for filing the missing persons report.
He had gotten into an argument with Dee Dee over finances, over his house, over his car. We quickly realized that Cedric is a little put offish. You know, he wants us to find his cousin. He wants us to figure out what's going on with his cousin, but he doesn't want to really cooperate with us. And we were a little confused about that. Does Cedric know what happened to him? Is this a cover-up?
Beginning in the late 19th century, bolita lotteries were popular among Tampa's working class, especially in the saloons of historic Ybor City. But it quickly became corrupt by organized crime.
The lottery has always been involved with criminal activity. People would do anything to get their hands on money.
As word of Abraham Shakespeare's disappearance began to spread, the residents of Lakeland were shocked. He was a fixture in the community, a man who'd spent his entire life in the same neighborhood.
His stomping grounds or his area of hanging out was over there at Super Choice.
Super Choice is definitely a gathering place in Lakeland's black neighborhood. That's where you will see a lot of the neighborhood guys hanging out, talking, catching up on that day's events.
Everybody was saying he might have just walked away, but that's not Abraham.
As an investigator, you always want to start an investigation being open-minded, but you almost go into a situation like this with a regret because you know 9 times out of 10, either there's some type of foul play or the person is deceased. That's not normal for somebody to be missing for 6 months and nobody has reported it. It's not normal.
Polk County Police are stumped. There is only one person who can even prove Abraham is still alive. His friend and financial advisor, Dee Dee Moore.
If anybody wanted to talk to Shakespeare, they always had to go through Dee Dee. So what they knew about their whereabouts was based on whatever Dee Dee told them.
She actually, in front of us, sends some text messages. Abraham, please call me. Tries to call him, tries to call his phone. And she would even go so far as, Abraham, I'm with the police. Please, just call me, call them, let them know that you're okay.
But despite Dee Dee's assurances, Abraham never contacts police directly. After a while, investigators become suspicious.
She continued that for, 3, 4, 5 days. And finally we realized, it's going nowhere.
When you interview somebody, you look for what we call interview indicators. It can be their eye movement. It can be their memory reaction. It can be their body language. It can be tics, physical tics. All of those things are indicators as to whether somebody is being truthful or they're being dishonest.
If he's somewhere else, show me the large withdrawal that he took. Show me the bank transactions in some Bahamian town that everybody thinks he's in.
After hearing about these wild goose chase stories about Abraham's whereabouts, law enforcement started to do surveillance on Dee Dee Moore. One of the things they did was track where the phone calls were being made.
Up until April 6th, Abraham is on the phone 6-7 hours a day. April 6th, that stops. From April 6th on, the only communication he has is with Dee Dee Moore.
Cell tower records reveal something even more surprising.
The GPS tracking in the phone knows your exact location. And most people never turn their GPS tracking off.
Well, Abraham's phone is hitting this tower. Dee Dee's phone is hitting this tower. So you follow the call, and either they're sitting in the car next to each other talking on the phone, or Dee Dee's got both the phones. So we call her in. And we say, hey, tell us about these phone calls. And she's like, yeah, well, I talked to him, but now he just won't call me. And so we have to lay it out to her. Did you have Abraham's phone? No, I didn't have Abraham's phone. Why would I have Abraham's phone?
Every time she would make a call or text, it would show the ping from the phone would actually be in her presence. So she was simply lying to investigators that, I'm leaving him messages.
When detectives confront Dee Dee with the evidence, she suddenly changes her story.
Okay, I did have his phone, but he wanted me to have it. He wanted to make it look like he was still here in case the IRS came looking for him. I mean, it was just one thing after another. And so at this point, there's definitely something with Dee Dee.
A background check reveals something even more disturbing.
We learned about an incident where Dee Dee was found by a passerby in a ditch. She claimed that she was carjacked, beat up, raped, left in the ditch to die. The sheriff determined that that was not true.
Reality, it was all fraud for insurance.
She was upside down on her vehicle, and she didn't want to make the payments and thought she would get some insurance money.
There were things that happened in Dee Dee's past that showed that she didn't walk on the straight and narrow.
She was actually funneling money from this company she worked for into her account. When she was confronted about it by this business, hours later, there was a fire that was later determined to be arson.
As an investigator, that's a huge red flag. If you'll do that, murder is a step away. There's nothing that you won't do.
Tampa police deal with plenty of bizarre cases, but in a peaceful town like Lakeland, the disappearance of a millionaire was more than a little unusual.
Lakeland is known for sunshine and retirees. They're not known for, lottery winners to come up missing.
It is a very safe community. You could certainly roll through there with your windows down at any time of night.
And the more detectives learn about Abraham Shakespeare's financial advisor, Dee Dee Moore, the stranger the case gets. Polk County Police discover that in the months leading up to Abraham's disappearance, he'd made a surprising decision. It began with a breakup from his girlfriend, Centoria Butler.
He had a child with Centoria Butler. Dee Dee had him believing that you're going to lose everything. Centoria is going to come after you for all your money. You're going to lose it all.
But Dee Dee offered Abraham a solution to the problem.
You have this child. We need to put everything in my company's name. And Abraham went along with it.
If he didn't have anything, then she couldn't get anything. I've always told him, everything that shine is not gold. Be mindful. Those are my words. Be mindful.
And in a matter of 3 months, Dee Dee had transferred all of Abraham's bank accounts and his properties in her name.
She moved into Abraham's $1 million home over in Lakeland.
It wasn't enough to arrest her. It wasn't enough to charge her. It was enough that in your gut, in your mind, and in your heart that this woman has did something to him.
A month passes, and detectives haven't found anything to tie Dee Dee to Abraham's disappearance. But then, just after Christmas, they get a break in the case.
I was actually driving to work, and Miss Walker called me, and she said, hey, I just want to let you know that, Abraham called me yesterday. I'm like, called you? She's like, well, I don't know for sure if it was. Well, we recognize the address. It's the Lakeland Mall. So we both look at each other like, let's go. It's a little after Christmas. It's the busiest day, huge traffic jam. So we finally get into the mall and we park. And we sit there and we both look at each other. What are we going to do? Well, we look up and here comes Dee Dee Moore pulling in her Hummer. So we watch the Hummer, and it pulls next to this car, and Dee Dee gets out, and she meets with a guy, and so we pull out a camera. We start taking pictures. We got a picture of her handing this guy money. Well, this car leaves and heads to the south. We both say at the same time, look, we got to stop this car. My partner pulls in front of the car at the stop sign, just cuts him off, and I get out, and I have my badge around my neck, and I walk up to the car. I have no idea who this guy is, and I tell him, hey, my name's David Clark. I'm a homicide detective. You got about 30 seconds to make a decision that's going to affect you the rest of your life.
The driver tells investigators that his name is Gregory Smith. Turns out, he's another old friend who owes Abraham money.
At the time, Greg was a barber in Lakeland, and prior to Abraham winning the lottery, Shakespeare would come to his shop and sweep his shop up for money.
Once we get Greg Smith to our office, we kind of lay out everything that we know so far. We knew he made the phone call to Miss Walker. We knew that he received money from Dee Dee. We also knew through the asset purchase agreement that he had a house that Abraham had bought him. So we gave him the opportunity to explain everything.
Greg tells investigators that Dee Dee offered to overlook some of his debt, as long as he agreed to do her a favor.
She got Greg to make a phone call to his mother, pretending to be Shakespeare.
He knew there was something going on, but he also knew he wasn't paying her the mortgage for his house.
Instead of arresting Greg, police decide to take advantage of his arrangement with Dee Dee.
We want you to keep doing what you're doing, but we want you to do it for us. We had Greg meet with Dee Dee on a daily basis, and, Dee Dee kept maintaining with Greg that Abraham was just missing.
In January of 2010, the Polk County Sheriff called a press conference and announced they had a suspect in the possible murder of Abraham Shakespeare.
We believe Abraham is a subject of foul play, and we believe Dee Dee is the person of interest in the case.
This is not by any means what I believe to be the end of this.
Within days, the move paid off. Once again, Dee Dee reaches out to Greg Smith, but this time, investigators are ready. Abraham Shakespeare wasn't the first person in the Tampa area to become the mark of a con artist.
There was a report that came out in 2019 that Florida was ranked number 1 in fraud. 1.4 million people were conned and scammed in 1 year. A contributing factor that you have so many retirees in the Tampa area, but anybody is capable of being conned or scammed.
When police announced that they believed Abraham Shakespeare had been murdered, the case became the talk of the town. His face, as well as Dee Dee's, appeared on the front page of every paper in Tampa Bay.
After that story appeared in the next day's newspaper, all of the media descended on the Red Hot Band property, and that's when she came out with the crocodile tears.
They're saying that I took a gun.
Greg Smith then introduces the undercover officer, Michael Smith, to Dee Dee Moore. A covertly recording meeting takes place between the three of them.
Mike immediately does what he does best and starts talking to her.
Well, I'm telling you, if you do this, you're going to be a very popular person. You're gonna be a legend, and you're going to be in a book, and probably on the Oprah show.
He said, I want $50,000. She said, done. Can I make it in payments? He said, yeah, make payments to my family.
I'm gonna need 10 up front. Once I do this, make sure my boy gets the money.
She basically fell for it, hook, line, and sinker.
But it's still not a confession.
I'm gonna need a body. I don't wanna go there and say I shot the man. He showed up with a throat cut.
Yeah.
She's like, well, I can try to find that out. He goes, no, you can't try to find it out. And he plays the role. And ultimately, an hour later, Greg gets a call from Dee Dee and says, hey, I've got the information. Can you meet me? So we follow Greg. Dee Dee actually gives him a gun and says, hey, I just got this. This is the gun that killed him.
She handed it over to him at that meeting. So at that point, we had the gun.
We're able to immediately call ATF and get a trace. They're only able to tell us the original purchaser of the gun. It was Dee Dee Moore.
Dee Dee also agrees to show Mike where Abraham's body is. And on the night of January 27th, they all meet outside a Plant City home owned by Dee Dee.
They park in the little parking lot at the house there in Plant City, and they walk back to a concrete slab, and she whispers to him, his body's right here, 6 or 7 feet down. She grabs a piece of angle iron and sticks it in the ground and says, you just dig right down here, and that's where it is.
Obviously, she could be yanking our chain yet again, but she marks the spot. That's enough to give us a search warrant for that property.
We had Greg call Dee Dee a few hours later and tell her to meet back in the Lakeland Mall parking lot.
When Dee Dee gets there, Lakeland police descend on the scene. She tries to play innocent, but she doesn't know she's been set up.
So I start telling her, listen, we have reason to believe that Abraham is buried on your property. And she immediately says, I was going to call you. Listen, that guy Greg that y'all grabbed, I think he killed him. I think he killed him and tried to set me up and put him on my property. And she goes into this long spill. So I'm like, listen, Dee Dee, we know Greg. Every conversation you've had with Greg for the last month and a half is recorded. Every time you've met with him, he's been watching, and you can just see her face.
Meanwhile, investigators start searching for Abraham's body.
Where Abraham Shakespeare's body was alleged to have been buried, it was under a 900 square foot slab of poured concrete.
But after 3 days of digging, they have nothing to show for it. Had Dee Dee outsmarted them?
People were like, is he really here? I wonder if he's here. We're down to 6.5 feet. Someone says, hey, I have something here. Once we cleared away all the dirt, you could look at the remains, and you knew it was Abraham. He hadn't decomposed much.
It's enough to arrest Dee Dee, but she continues to deny her involvement.
I didn't kill the man. I know in my heart there's God up above, and God knows I didn't shoot him.
For residents of the Tampa Bay area, when Abraham Shakespeare won the lottery, it was a heartwarming reminder that good things sometimes do happen to good people. So his murder hit everyone especially hard.
To be at a height of an individual winning such an enormous amount of money and then taken advantage of by the hands of this, many people would say, an evil woman. It was not just a tragic situation for Miss Walker, but it was a tragic situation for the city.
On November 28th, 2012, the trial of Dee Dee Moore begins. The entire community of Lakeland watches the proceedings, hoping the prosecution will not let Abraham's murder go unpunished.
The state wanted to show that Dee Dee Moore callously and premeditatedly murdered Abraham Shakespeare for the money.
After Dee Dee Moore gained, I guess you could say, comfortable control over Abraham's finances, she started making pretty elaborate purchases.
I would see sequential months where everything was lining up, and then all of a sudden the money just vanishes out of this account. We're talking about $1 million.
I mean, this woman murdered this man after befriending him. She didn't care about any of that. The only thing that she cared about was protecting herself and protecting the con.
However, prosecutors believe that Abraham eventually figured out what was going on.
He started to develop the sense that Dee Dee Moore was controlling his money to a point where he didn't have access to the sums of money that he was normally accustomed to. Based on the evidence that was presented and all the witnesses, it was determined that on the night of April 6, 2009, Dee Dee Moore had arranged to go with Abraham Shakespeare to the Hard Rock Casino here in Tampa.
For the first time, he confronted Dee Dee. She probably realized, I'm going to have to kill him. He asked her, hey, I went to the bank, I couldn't get my money. She said, it's okay, it's in the safe in the house in Plant City. You can follow their phone records all the way down through Lakeland to Plant City to this house. He thinks he's going there for her to open this safe to give him this huge sum of money.
It simply looks like she had pulled the firearm out of her safe, which was probably already unlocked and open, and shot him twice within close proximity of each other. We had evidence of a chair that she had discarded, but she did not discard the carpeting. She simply cleaned it. So we were able to determine that blood located within the carpeting tested positive for his DNA.
Prosecutors also showed the jury the full video Dee Dee took of Abraham the day he disappeared.
There's a video that Dee Dee makes of Abraham that she used as proof that he was gone.
So where do you want to go to?
It don't matter to me. I'm not a picky person.
California. You want a foreign country? Cozumel.
When you first watch it, you don't see it. But if you really study that video, he throws his hand at her like, basically, just stop. And the video cuts off. Well, when we found Abraham's body, he was wearing those exact same clothes as that video.
The tape is actually setting the whole stage, the fact that he's going away, he's going to leave town. Nobody's going to hear from him.
When finally confronted that Ronald was a fictitious person, she changed up to the story. Well, Abraham and I were arguing in my office. My safe was open, and he got physical with me, and my 14-year-old son was there, and he protected me by grabbing my gun and shooting Abraham Shakespeare. So ultimately, she put the blame on her own child.
On December 10th, 2012, the jury begins its deliberations.
They had audio, they had video of her. They had her requesting a law enforcement officer to act as her hitman. They gave us tapes of her interviews, and she was all over the place.
She was found guilty by the jury after the completion of the trial.
They polled the jury, every single one, solidly said yes.
The fact that it was a first-degree murder with a firearm, sentencing takes place immediately because it is a mandatory life in prison without parole.
For the city of Lakeland and the greater Tampa Bay area, the verdict brings a sense of relief. And despite his loss, the memory of Abraham Shakespeare lives on.
Abraham will always be a part of Lakeland's history in terms of the most benevolent man to ever have lived in the community.
Everybody liked him. He happened on some fortune that very few people have. And that he was taken, just basically destroyed because of it. To take advantage of a person like she did and destroy him is kind of beyond, my comprehension.
What was so sad to me about the whole case is every time I ever saw an interview or heard anything from him or read a media story about him, he always talked about the unrest, that he wasn't at peace. So winning the money didn't really change his life. Winning the lottery ended up being a curse.
It hurts when I think about it. It hurts real bad. I had that dream about my son a few months ago, I guess. And seeing him standing on the other side of me, and he was looking up. He just kept his head looking up. I don't know what he was looking at. Abraham was at peace. Dreams have meanings. They sure do.
Columbus, Ohio is often described as a big city with a small town personality. It's also one of the safest places in the country. But for some of the city's residents, nothing could be further from the truth. For all its charm, Columbus is plagued by poverty. And for one family, the struggle to survive would ultimately end in tragedy. Founded in the 1800s, Columbus was once a bustling hub for the fur trade. Today, it's one of the fastest growing cities in the country, with a diverse population.
I'm born and raised here. Columbus, Ohio is one of the greatest cities on earth. There's a lot of businesses that are just popping up here. Like the tech community is crazy.
Overall, it's a great place to live, progressive, friendly, good schools, all that good Midwestern stuff.
Columbus was recently ranked in the top 10 of places to live. So that involves schools, community, crime, education. This is a banking capital. It's an industrial capital. It's a place of innovation, discovery.
And I think that's one thing that drew a lot of people here, just a sense of they seen the growth.
Columbus is a city of 800,000+ people, 14th largest city in the country.
And it's home to one of the largest universities in the United States.
Ohio State University has a rich tradition of being the land-grant college, open public university, very accepting. 50,000 students, a small city in itself, and they have expanded with hospitals and research and laboratories and agricultural sciences at Ohio State, which makes it just a huge sprawling complex.
Not only do we have the Ohio State University, the Buckeyes, but we also have a sense of growth. Columbus is growing like you wouldn't believe. People are moving here, and not just people who just want to raise a great family.
North Linden, it's an inner ring neighborhood, and the ring of I-270, which is our beltway that goes around Columbus. So it's within that more urban core, I guess. A lot of folks live there. A lot of people are really loyal to North Linden because I think it is an older community, and they feel a real sense of kinship and neighborhood there.
But most of the families that reside in North Linden aren't lucky enough to experience the prosperity enjoyed by the rest of the city. And those families are disproportionately affected by the city's most violent crimes. In the early morning hours of January 18th, 2008, Columbus police receive an emergency call about a shooting in the neighborhood.
911, what's the emergency?
My brother just got shot. I'm not really sure. My mom is outside. She's handicapped.
The 911 caller was Diane Lewis. She said that there had been a shooting. She needed someone to come out.
Before an officer is dispatched, they want to assess what type of call it is so they know what they're walking into. If it's domestic violence, or it's burglary, or it's theft, or it's an active shooter.
It became clear very quickly that it was some kind of home invasion, multiple suspects, masked, armed with guns, and demanding money.
There was a struggle, a gunshot, and they fled. This whole thing was done in 60 seconds from start to finish.
When officers arrive, they find Diane attempting CPR on the victim, 17-year-old Dennis Lewis.
I found a shallow heartbeat. I'm about to start compressions and I'm on top of him. And the police were behind me with a double-barrel shotgun. Freeze!
She's covered in blood because she had been holding him. And so they're telling her, get down. They didn't know if she was involved. Like, they didn't know what was going on. So they're screaming at her and she's screaming back.
I just start losing it. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm pregnant. That's my brother. Save him. And they start compressions and they ripped his shirt off and they threw him on the gurney.
It was like a dream. It was like, this can't be real.
A good kid from an East High School, why would this have happened to him?
For twin brothers, Darius and Dennis Lewis, life on the city's east side was full of challenges.
The Linden area, if you know anything about Columbus, Ohio, is not too good of an area. And at the time when they were growing up, it had just started to be an area that seen a lot of deaths.
There was a lot of poverty, a lot of crime. Like everybody that's in my life, I can say has been impacted by crime in one way or another.
People getting into fights, stabbed, robberies, lots of drugs. I don't know how many needles I found just walking the streets.
We grew up in an impoverished neighborhood. This was our normal. We have to deal with it. Everyone is pretty much on, food stamps and government assistance.
But despite those hurdles, the boys managed to find some normalcy, due in large part to the influence of their mother, April, and their sister, Diane.
Having their mom and having their sister be so involved in their achievement and in their accomplishments and in their success was very important to their upbringing.
My brother Dennis and I, we were two peas in a pod, literally. We would do everything together. We just had different colors, so our mom could tell us apart.
Dennis was a firecracker. Oh my God. Darius was more on the reserve side. He was all about the books. He was all about studying.
Dennis was the outgoing one. Darius was very shy and kept to himself. Dennis had dreadlocks and Darius was shaved. He had a short hair, gay, a fade.
They were total opposite, but the love that they had for one another, it never changed. They just had a funny way of showing it.
From a young age, the Lewis brothers had the kind of sibling rivalry that pushed both to become better.
There's always a good twin. There's always a bad twin. But when you got two good twins, great twins that compete with each other to do better, that's that inner drive. I would ask one of them about their grades, and the other one would answer with his grades. Like if they both had science, they would say, okay, I got an A, but he got a B. So they competed with everything. They found out the right way to win, and they wouldn't rub it in your face when they beat you either. They were good kids.
Given their environment, they definitely took refuge in not only each other and their family, but being devoted students, being the best that they could at marching band. Band was really a big thing for both of them.
Everyone who was a part of the band was like a family. For all of us, it was kind of like that home away from home. There you had mentors, you had older brothers.
Our band director, she always said, do what you have to do until you do what you want to do. So that's something that always stuck with me.
Well, we met through East High School marching band. Darius and Dennis both, just doing everything they could to build up that resume that the colleges want to see so that they could then go to a good school and then get a better job and then have a better career and then move on that path.
Essentially, our plan was to get our mom out of poverty.
Ms. April had multiple sclerosis that she was dealing with, and a lot of people who knew Dennis and Darius knew that they were taking care of her.
They were kids that were succeeding in a bad neighborhood with a mother who was disabled. It was kind of a rarity for those kids to be doing so well with so little.
We worked part-time jobs. We still, managed to involve ourselves in sports and carry straight A's while in high school.
Darius and I moved in together when I was moving out of my parents' house because I was 18. Darius moved out just maybe 2 months shy of his 18th birthday. And Dennis stayed at the house with April, with their mom.
My brother, he was actually going to go to Florida for college, and I was going to stay at Ohio State University. I wanted to stay close to my mom.
But their dreams of a brighter future were shattered when Dennis was shot and killed. Now both the community and investigators want to know why.
You just don't think stuff like that will happen to somebody, especially somebody like Dennis.
There was so many ideas going through my head. Like, why would this happen to my family? Why would this happen to my brother?
On January 18th, 2008, masked gunmen claimed the life of 17-year-old Dennis Lewis during an apparent break-in. Unfortunately, for the black community in North Linden, it was simply business as usual.
At that time, Linden had 4 years in a row a student was killed. They had a street named Oak and Kill.
Definitely not the most idealistic place to grow up.
I became a reporter here in 1985. We immediately started covering an insurgence of crack cocaine into the area, the crack world. It escalated into the 90s in a rash of homicides over drug turf.
It's not uncommon that there'll be beefs between kids in different gangs, and a lot of it, I think, is drug-related.
It was just back and forth, and we were just in the middle of it.
Every city has a hood. Not a ghetto, but a hood. You know what I'm saying? We have places that you better not be after a certain time. You better lock your cars when you're driving through.
At the time, being a kid, I didn't really see too much wrong with it. I guess you could say I was kind of blind to some of the activity that may have been going on.
We normalize it, but we have no other outlet. I mean, we don't have money to move and things of that sort to get out of the neighborhood. You live in the ghetto because it's affordable. And we just didn't have a choice.
But even in East Columbus, it's uncommon for a group of masked gunmen to break into a house. Since Darius was living with his girlfriend, the only two people home that night were Dennis and his mother, April.
When you are interviewing a family member of the victim, this has to be one of the most difficult times in their life. It doesn't mean that you can't go in there and get the answers that you need, but having patience is very important.
They interviewed April repeatedly about, could you identify a voice? What were they wearing? And she did the best she could, but she was obviously traumatized by finding out her son had been killed.
April told them that as she was asleep on the sofa, she could hear someone trying to access the side door.
She stated that there was 4 to 5 men that came into the house, and they put a gun to her head.
Whoever it was said, "Freeze, and if you move, I'm gonna blow your head off."
She described them as young, she described them as male, she described them as black. She didn't indicate that she'd had any direct conversation with any of them.
To police, the scene that Dennis and Darius's mother describes begins to sound like a robbery gone wrong.
They kept asking where the money was, as if they knew there had been money in that house before.
They were running through the home, opening up cupboards, dumping out shoe boxes, just ransacking the house.
She told them that I don't have any money. I don't have anything. We're poor.
The noise from that assault roused Dennis from his bedroom, which was on the first floor, and he came to the aid of his mother. While one held a gun to April Lewis's head, another attacked Dennis.
Dennis then said, "You're not going to hurt my mother," and came out and started to fight them. And the fight went on for quite some time.
He was fighting for his life. And that was the only way that they were going to get out of there was to kill him.
Dennis was in control of the fight that was happening inside the house, and it took someone having to use a weapon in order to gain control of the fight between the two.
I can only imagine being attacked. I know he didn't know what was going on. That's when she heard the gunshot.
Then, as quickly as they'd come, the attackers fled the scene. April immediately called for help.
His mom, because she was sick at the time, had to crawl outside on the porch and yell for her daughter, who was a couple houses down.
All of a sudden I hear, Don, they shot your brother. Please come help us. As soon as she said Don, I knew that was my mom. I grabbed my cell phone and I dialed 911. I said I need an ambulance.
Forensic evidence paints an even clearer picture of the struggle between Dennis and the intruders.
There had been a very valiant, bloodied fight and went off into 2 different bedrooms, as well as the hallway, into the attic, going upstairs.
There was splats of blood on the bed. And then there was like this long wall with all this blood on it.
This one print in particular got their attention because they observed ridge detail in the blood, which they knew could then lead them to a possible fingerprint identification.
There are only 2 ways, basically, to get a print in blood. One is it would be as if you have a small amount of blood on your finger and you touch the wall. If you have a small amount of blood that's drying on the wall and you would put your finger on it, you could leave a blood print that way as well. Either of those ways would require you to be at the location at the time of the incident.
The detective instructed the crime scene search unit to collect that piece of drywall. They actually physically cut the drywall off of the wall. That was packaged up and then sent back to the property room.
As investigators continue to search for clues, Diane Lewis makes the most difficult phone call of her life.
Sometime in the middle of the night, I hear his phone ringing. And then he's like, "What? Diane, slow down." And he sits up in the bed. And at that point, I felt something was wrong. I could tell that there was something going on.
I received a phone call early in the morning. It was from my sister, and she said that your brother has been shot. I threw on a coat and my slippers, and I just jumped in my car. I put the foot to the pedal, and I just drove so fast.
He parked his car in the middle of the street, got out, didn't shut the door. The yellow tape was already up. He ran to that house.
By then, it had become an active crime scene, and anybody approaching would have been stopped and then questioned. And he identified himself as Darius Lewis.
When Darius is told the details of what happened, he finds it hard to believe anyone would try to rob his mother's house.
It wasn't like she had big TVs and expensive things in her house. It wasn't like they had a bunch of stuff worth stealing. So why would someone even break into the house?
In fact, he thinks the intruders were after someone else.
I had a cousin, and his name is Joey. He would come over sporadically, eat and things of that sort. 2 weeks prior to me moving out, I see him packaging up pills and things of that sort, and I was very uncomfortable. For me, it was something heavy. I was like, I don't want to be involved in any of, whatever's going on here.
The theory was that word on the street was Joey may have kept money and or drugs at the house.
He was a likely target of this robbery, even though he wasn't there.
Hours after Dennis Lewis was murdered, the city of Columbus wakes to the terrible news that another young life had been cut short by gun violence.
There was a lot of media coverage because this was a family who was poor, but those boys were in band. They were good students. They were not the typical kids you hear about that get killed or that are involved in anything. So it was all over the news.
They wrote up a big article about the fact that they were kids who were succeeding from a background where oftentimes you don't see kids succeed, and it just, amplified the sadness of the story.
I was tired of it. I was tired of dealing with another young person losing their lives in my city. I was tired of having to report that.
This is a rising star in the community who is a standout student, really remarkable with a future ahead of him.
I just couldn't grasp the fact that my twin would not be here with me. It's like, what do I do now?
Darius believes his brother may have been killed accidentally, and that his cousin Joey was the intended target of the robbery.
Joey Westbrook had lived in the house 3 or 4 nights a week. He was involved in a drug trade, moving large sums into southern Ohio.
Joey would have people over. Always had a different girl. Always had his hair done and, Versace glasses.
He drove a little fancier car, flashed money, was out all hours of the night. He made no secret of the fact that he was dealing in drugs.
Part of why Darius moved out of the house was that he had come downstairs at one point in time and saw Joey counting pills.
The motive that seemed to ultimately make the most sense to us was they'd targeted the house thinking that the dope connection still existed.
But Joey wasn't there when the break-in occurred.
He was already in jail. He was locked up.
The day before the homicide, Joey was picked up on charges in southern Ohio and I believe the city of Portsmouth and locked up.
At time of his arrest, he had over $12,000 drugs and cash on him.
So did the intruders pick the wrong time for their break-in? Or had they gone there expecting the house to be empty?
They went from that neighborhood because they didn't know what house they were going into. They went in, thought it'd be easy to just smash everything up, grab what they want, and be out.
They might have made that miscalculation and instead encountered a fit 17-year-old kid trying to defend his mom.
Investigators pay a visit to Joey Westbrook in prison. To their surprise, he admits to keeping drugs in the house and agrees with their theory about the break-in.
He believes that someone was looking for his stash of drugs and his money the night Dennis Lewis was murdered.
Unfortunately, Joey has no idea who it might have been.
He was moving large amounts of drugs in and out of Columbus and Scioto County as a pipeline, and he had a lot of enemies.
In a city that large, you're literally looking at hundreds of potential suspects. And without having any evidence, you're really looking for a needle in a haystack.
On January 24th, Dennis Lewis is laid to rest. Mourners from all over the city of Columbus come to pay their respects.
The funeral was over 1,800 people.
So you had a lot of faculty, you had students, you had family, you had just community.
A lot of people spoke, a lot of people came. It was like celebrity status. I've never seen anything like it in my life. Our mayor, he said that he wanted to pay for everything. He has to have the best of everything. And he paid for my brother's funeral.
When the mayor of your city is talking about you, you know how important you are.
Darius leads the choir in song and delivers a heartfelt message to his brother's killers.
I do remember saying that whomever did this, I forgive them. There's no malice, but please step forward.
His appeal goes unanswered. Weeks pass with no further leads, and Columbus police come under pressure to find answers.
It was a month. No arrests had been made, and if there's not an arrest in the first few days, the odds drop dramatically that there's going to be an arrest.
During the aftermath, Darius was very close with the detectives that were investigating the case. He spoke to them almost daily, very cooperative, tried to, give leads.
The coverage of an average homicide may only last a day. That wasn't the case here. This, it grabbed television headlines and dominated crime coverage.
The community was absolutely reeling, along with the family. I mean, this was just an utter shock and just so devastating.
Murders in Columbus, Ohio are an all too common reality, especially for residents of the city's poorest neighborhoods. But after a month of investigating the shooting death of 17-year-old Dennis Lewis, detectives still have no suspects.
The case had kind of gone quiet, and in the meantime, other homicides are happening in the city, so the case sort of ended up on the to-do list.
There were a lot of rumors that were going around. Is somebody going to be man enough or woman enough or be honest enough to come forward and say, hey, you know what I'm saying, it was me?
Then, in February of 2008, there's a breakthrough in the form of new forensic evidence.
While the police are conducting their investigation, the fingerprint examiners are going through all of the different prints that they had developed at the scene to see if they could develop a suspect from those. At one point in time, the fingerprint identifier came and said, I've got this print, and you're not going to believe who it comes back to.
They had recovered a print in blood off of the wall. That print came back to Darius Lewis.
They were so shocked at the results that they had 3 other fingerprint examiners double-check to verify.
I mean, this wasn't a case where people wanted to believe it.
They did identify 16 points of comparison on this fingerprint, linking it to Darius Lewis. There was no doubt this was his fingerprint.
The fact that Darius's fingerprints are in the house isn't surprising or suspicious, but the timing is.
Most people don't know that fingerprints or palm prints can last up to as much as 20 years.
What made the print remarkable and unique was that allegedly it was in blood.
In order for you to leave a bloody handprint, you have to be there when this crime occurred, get blood on your hand, and then lean against the wall. That's the only way that's going to happen.
Quite frankly, you don't need an additional investigation with respect to him. You know he was there.
Instead of arresting Darius, police decide to lure him in and try to get a confession.
February 13th is when I got the call. They say, hey, we have leads. We want you to come identify some people.
They tricked him. They told him, you can go to school after you're done. Just got a few questions for you.
And then I was end up grilled, interrogated.
Well, how could we explain one of your palm prints being in the crime scene?
My palm prints?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Okay.
My blood. That moment of being, blamed of killing your twin, that was total craziness. My whole insides literally feel like it fell out. I was trying to say, what do you mean? What do you mean? I didn't understand it.
This is crazy.
It's upsetting.
This is crazy. I swear to God, this is crazy.
Scientifically, your print is in your brother's blood.
I'm like, this is not right. This is not right.
Despite the intense questioning, Darius refuses to give in.
This is not happening.
That's your print. That's your brother's blood. That is happening.
That's not
Get back.
He could not explain the fingerprint on the wall other than he lived there, and he would never hurt his mother or his brother. His story was consistent throughout, that he was not there and he would not do this.
Darius was interrogated by one of Columbus Police's best interrogators, and at no point did he falter or flinch or anything.
He left me for a little moment, and I'm just praying, what is going on? What is going on? I do not understand, Lord, why is this happening to me?
This is not real.
It It's some of the most disturbing tape you can ever watch because he is absolutely beside himself, shaking and holding himself, and there must be a mistake.
He came back in, and that's when they arrested me. I was charged with aggravated robbery, aggravated murder, aggravated kidnapping.
He is being accused of the most heinous crime, bludgeoning his brother to death and shooting him.
To their friends and family, it's a crime too horrible to consider. But what if it's true?
The detectives, they came in the house on February 13th and pulled my arm to the side and said, "Do you want to tell your mom, or do you want us to tell your mom?" I said, "Tell her what?" Your brother's charged in the murder of your other brother.
Not only was it impossible for who he was and what his character was and what the crime was, but it was impossible physically because he was on the south side of town with me in our home, in our bed.
I got a phone call and they were like, cut on the news. I was just like, you gotta be kidding me. This can't be real. You start to think like, well, damn, did he really do this?
After a month of investigation, Columbus police have charged Darius Lewis with the murder of his twin brother, Dennis. Once the story hits local media, the reaction is polarizing.
The media response to Darius being arrested, as you can imagine, took a very ugly turn. It really seemed that Dennis was this just remarkable young man, and then here's this either jealous or lesser twin who's now gone and taken his life, and that was definitely the portrayal that was occurring.
We started to see division amongst some people who felt that maybe he would have done it, some people who were defending the fact that, no, he wouldn't have done it.
When we found out Darius was arrested and charged, anger. They wanted to change the narrative and close the case. And a lot of people believe that they picked Darius because they had nobody else.
It very much looked like they just want to close this case. They just want to say, well, we solved it.
It went from them putting up a picture of him in school to a picture of him that I'd have been like, okay, he did that if I didn't know the young man.
We had this dichotomy of family denial, police insistence for months, while Darius Lewis professed his innocence in jail.
I told him, if we are the last two standing, I will never leave you lonely.
As he awaits his trial, Darius keeps his spirits up by focusing on his studies and on God.
I was confined physically, but mentally, I was still open. The school, they brought my books up there. I still graduated basically while I was incarcerated. Psychologically getting through those days, it was more of my spiritual connection. There was not a day that I did not read my Bible. I'm not built to break. So that was my motto throughout the whole entire ordeal. I'm not built to break. I really felt in my heart of hearts, I was going to be released. I was going to be vindicated of all charges, exonerated.
But Darius's faith will be tested. At his pretrial hearing, the court rules he will be tried as an adult. If convicted, Darius could spend the rest of his life in prison.
There's different things that can assist a judge in making a decision whether a child or youth is going to be charged as an adult. The type of crime, the brutality or viciousness of the crime. Anybody over the age of 13 can be charged as an adult.
After the court hearing, Adam Neiman was officially appointed as Darius's counsel. And one of the first things that we did was go down to the jail to meet him so that we could get his side of the story. Adam and I were just both struck by Darius and how inconceivable it is that this person sitting in front of us is even capable of carrying out the things that he was accused of doing.
Everyone said it. You know, this isn't the kind of kid who would do this. There was a bloody print saying otherwise.
On March 9th, 2009, more than a year after being arrested for the brutal murder of his twin brother, the trial of Darius Lewis finally begins.
This is a huge media case. True TV was in the courtroom recording. My grandmother in Canada was watching the coverage.
Darius Lewis was wearing a suit, and I believe he carried a Bible to trial with him.
As the prosecution makes their opening arguments, it becomes clear that the case will come down to a single piece of evidence.
In a typical burglary case, you get the print and you say, hey, that person's never been in the house before. If there are prints there, they must be the burglar. In this particular case, because it was at the residence where Darius had slept and been raised, the fact that the print was in blood was the significant factor.
Prosecution railed that Darius was lying, that he had to have committed this crime. He couldn't explain away this palm print.
If you're a prosecutor, I'm not sure if there's a more powerful piece of evidence than a bloody print.
In addition to having easy access to the house, the state argues Darius also had plenty of motive to kill his brother.
Their theory of the case was that Darius's motive for doing the shooting was to get some cash that was in the top drawer of Dennis's dresser that he had been saving up for a car.
This was a robbery. Darius brought accomplices to search the house for his brother's money, and they ended up in a brotherly scuffle.
Maybe it just got out of hand that the crime was not supposed to end in homicide. That this happened because Dennis fought back.
But the defense believes that theory is ridiculous.
I've covered every manner of family homicide. Everything I'd heard didn't indicate to me that there was any kind of bad blood between Dennis and Darius.
These two boys, whatever one had belonged to the other. I mean, if Darius wanted that money, Dennis would have given it to him, no questions asked.
It's just like, I have money. I don't need to do that.
The defense case rested heavily on the testimony of the girlfriend. She eventually testified that they were in bed together when Darius got the call that his brother had been shot. The prosecution tried to poke a hole in her story that she might have been lying to protect her lover. But again, there was no way to prove where he was other than they saw him walking down the sidewalk, heading toward the house.
They started asking questions more like, how do you know that Darius was in your house the night of the 17th? I would have noticed if he had left, he wouldn't have had time to get there and get back and dispose of whatever,
Darius would have had to driven back home after having this fight with his brother, jump back into bed with his girlfriend so that he can pretend to be asleep when the phone call comes in. It's inconceivable.
They also challenged the validity of the prosecutor's key evidence.
They cross-examined the latent print examiner that we had called to testify, and they raised the issue that the print was in blood.
All we were hearing about was 16 points of comparison, but at no point in time did anyone testify about where the print was located. And it was at that time we used transparencies to basically show that there's no red substance there.
He tried to get my expert to acknowledge that. The expert would not acknowledge that, but I thought that he had raised some doubt.
We were feeling optimistic because for the first time, we aren't being faced with a piece of evidence that is basically something that we can't overcome.
But as the jury begins their deliberations, Darius's fate is far from certain.
I'm like, am I going to go home or am I going to prison for something I didn't do?
It's March of 2009, and the residents of Columbus, Ohio anxiously await a verdict in the trial of Darius Lewis, an honor student accused of murdering his twin brother.
This became a story of biblical proportions. The Cain and Abel story of how a brother could kill a brother. How could this possibly be? We were just waiting for the jury to deliberate. These things can last for days.
I'm trying to, understand, did we convince the jury? Did we do everything that we possibly can? It was surreal. It was a moment to say, they have my life in their hands.
Unexpectedly, the jury returns after only one day. But as it turns out, they haven't reached a decision at all.
One of the jurors had some family issue. Because of that, the juror could not come back to continue deliberations, and therefore you could not have a unanimous jury of 12.
Case was declared a mistrial at the defense request. When the mistrial was declared, there was an audible gasp from the Lewis family, and they wanted closure. They wanted the acquittal. They wanted Darris to come home free. And they knew that they were going to have to go through this again, because the prosecution had said openly that we'll seek another trial.
Darris remains in custody, but instead of immediately setting a new trial date, the prosecution and defense reach an agreement. They will first retest the fingerprints found at the crime scene.
I think that's when we saw the evidence of the print, it not being in blood, the prosecution, they were like, okay, to make it all fair, let's test this evidence.
They've raised this issue. We need to make sure, because our whole case is based on the fact that the print is in blood. If the print's not in blood, then we don't have a case.
On August 6, 2009, a forensic expert renders their decision.
The prosecutor's office tested at the lab. We were all present there when it happened. When you're taking a look at the drywall that was cut out in this case, and you can clearly see the bloody handprint that the detective saw at the scene, and then above that print, you see the latent print, which was Darris's print that could have been placed there at any time in the past 4 years. And clearly, they're not in the same location.
The lab person came and told us there was no sign of blood. They had not tested positive for blood.
The mistrial was really a win. It allowed the defense team an opportunity to re-examine the evidence. And in doing so, they discovered that that bloody fingerprint didn't exist. And it helped exonerate their client.
I was happy I had my answer. I was able to do what needed to be done. Half hour later, he walked out of jail.
I go downstairs and Shannon's all on the floor, crying and everything.
I fell to my knees crying, you're going home, you're going home.
The news of Darris's release sends shockwaves through the community.
I was prepping for dinner that day. My phone rings, and it's Adam Neiman, his lawyer. He said, turn on the TV. Your brother was acquitted of all charges. And I just hollered. When I got out, my sister, she gave me this big hug. I'll never forget this big hug. And she's like, well, where do you want to go? I was like, just want to see Dennis. I wanted to see where my brother was buried.
After 18 months in jail, Darris is finally free. But what he has lost can never be replaced.
Reality sat in for me. Is like, what do I do? My name has been thrown in mud. There's a stigma on my name. How do I balance? How do I come back from this?
The first thing I thought was Darris would have full ride scholarships to Ohio State, but he probably would have been our valedictorian. We took everything from him.
The city decided that they had to make restitution to this young man for the time he spent in jail for a crime he did not commit. And they came up with a number, a settlement of $950,000.
They gave him some money. They couldn't give him his brother back. And he'll forever be affected by it, his mom, his sister, his whole family.
Columbus had to admit that the homicide detective and the crime scene fingerprint expert never compared notes. And there was a breakdown in communication.
Horrible incompetence. I think that they just put blinders on once they got Darris. The police department did come out and issue a full apology, admit wrongdoing, and also put in place procedures so that this hopefully would not happen again in the future.
Since his release, Darris has gone on to help others in his East Columbus community and to realize many of the dreams he and Dennis once shared.
To make it through such a horrible experience and come out to be the productive, successful man that he is just really speaks volume as to who he is as a person.
Even though our brother is gone, he still lives through him. He still lives through him. I do feel like Dennis is with me. I carry him with me every day. He's here with me.
Washington, D.C. is a city synonymous with power. From the White House to the Pentagon, it is a symbol of America's influence, both at home and abroad. But D.C. and its suburbs in Maryland and Virginia have another side, one that has nothing to do with politics. It's a sprawling metropolitan area with over 6 million residents. And in 2002, they were all living in fear of a dangerous serial killer who was stalking their streets. Washington, D.C. is more than just the capital of the United States. It's also an important cultural center full of national landmarks.
It's a repository of our founding documents, monuments to our greatest leaders.
Beautiful parks, beautiful museums, tourists walking around with their kids and look at the rich history.
It is also a city that is rich in diversity.
DC is an international city because it's really the host to the world. We have the largest diplomatic delegation in the world.
You have people here from all different walks of life. You have politicians, ambassadors, activists from all over the world, but you also have hardworking, working-class citizens who keep the city running, and they have nothing to do with politics.
DC's prominent black community has been an important part of its identity since the 1800s.
From the time before the Civil War and certainly after the Civil War, with Reconstruction and huge in-migration of African Americans moving out of the South because of oppression down there and mechanization of the farms. D.C. was emancipated before Lincoln issued the General Proclamation, so there's the history of the fight for civil rights.
Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King did his I Have a Dream speech here.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation.
It's a city that has a lot of pride within the African American community.
To this day, the city is still roughly, if not a little bit more, than 50-50 African Americans.
And while the city itself is home to more than 700,000, the greater metropolitan area contains over 6 million, a vast suburban sprawl that stretches into the neighboring states of Maryland and Virginia.
Many of the people who live and work here refer to this area as the DMV, which stands for DC, Maryland, and Virginia.
The DMV, which I thought was just a place you go to renew your driver's license and your registration when I first moved here. It has a life of its own.
Most of us who live and work in the area go in and out of each of those states or regions almost every day.
Locals don't make much of a distinction between the different areas. As far as they're concerned, they're all a part of the same community, a very desirable community.
Some of the most affluent counties in the country are in the Washington, D.C. area. Fairfax County in Virginia, Loudoun County in Virginia. In Maryland, just outside D.C., Prince George's County is the most affluent, predominantly black county in the country. You know, there are areas that need more attention than some other areas, but it's a pretty middle class to upper middle class community.
Still, like most urban areas, the DMV region has dealt with its share of crime.
There was a point in time
Back in the 80s and maybe early 90s, when the crime rate, especially the violent crime around D.C. and the surrounding areas, was very high.
And it was all generated primarily because of drugs, crack cocaine.
Through a coordinated effort by state, city, and federal authorities, the worst of the region's drug problems were eventually brought under control. Since then, the overall crime rate has been on the decline. And things seem to be looking up for the nation's capital until September 11th, 2001.
Everyone knows the terrorist attacks took place in New York, Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and here in Washington at the Pentagon. All of a sudden, there's this big, billowing black smoke coming from the Pentagon, and there are fighter jets scrambling and flying over the city. It was a tough time, but we got through the immediate impact of 9/11. After that, the city continued to be nervous because you never knew when the next shoe would drop.
It was in the wake of 9/11 that the DMV would be targeted by another kind of homegrown terrorism. Just a year later, it would become a hunting ground for one of the country's most notorious serial killers. October 3rd, 2002, at 7:41 a.m., 39-year-old landscaper James Sonny Buchanan is working outside a car dealership, 17 miles north of D.C. in the Maryland suburb of Rockville, when suddenly he collapses.
He was cutting the grass between the street and the sidewalk. He stumbles away from his lawnmower and he falls over. One of the employees says, "Hey, Mr. Buchanan's down." They're running out. The first thought is, uh-oh, heart attack.
But when the dealership employees arrive, they find Sonny covered in blood.
Obviously, this was something much more serious than a heart attack, so they immediately called 911.
Sonny is rushed to a nearby hospital, where doctors make a startling discovery.
He had been shot. The emergency crews, they were anticipating some sort of a trauma from an accident. They weren't expecting a bullet hole.
Unfortunately, it's too late to save his life. Sonny is pronounced dead from a single gunshot wound to the torso. Meanwhile, investigators arrive at the scene.
When there's a shooting, one of the first things that you want to know is that were there any witnesses? But in this case, nobody saw anything.
Montgomery County, Maryland was always considered an extremely safe county to live in.
At the time, it seems like a completely random act of violence. But as investigators will soon discover, it's only the first of many.
There wasn't any thought of this being the beginning of a nightmare.
30 minutes later, at a gas station in nearby Aspen Hill, a 54-year-old taxi driver named Prem Kumar Walekar is also shot and killed.
Mr. Walekar was in a local gas station, filling up his tank for the day. Nothing remarkable about him. He's pumping gas. Shot rings out. Down he goes.
A loud shot was heard by many witnesses, but nobody saw anything. There was a pediatrician pumping gas in a minivan with her baby in the car. She heard the shot and immediately saw a victim staggering towards her car. He, in fact, fell against her car, slid down the side of her minivan, blood everywhere, and she ran over to him with her cell phone, starting to call 911.
The two cases aren't immediately connected, but then investigators receive news of a third fatal shooting just a few miles south. The victim is Sarah Ramos, a 35-year-old immigrant from El Salvador.
A young lady sitting on a park bench, fatally shot, reading a book, just randomly.
This shooting happened at 8:30, so now you've got 3 shootings under an hour within a 5-mile radius of each other. This time, someone did spot a possible shooter.
There was a witness that heard the shot, looked up, and happened to see a white van or truck moving out of the parking lot.
But investigators have just started searching for the vehicle when yet another call comes in. At 9:58 a.m., 25-year-old Lori Ann Lewis Rivera is shot and killed while vacuuming her van at a Kensington, Maryland gas station.
There's bodies dropping in Montgomery County. We're having people shot faster than we can respond. And it's continuing to a couple of hours, and it's every 30 minutes someone's being shot. We're under attack. We need help.
The unexplained shooting spree has Montgomery County Police on high alert. The killer is on the move, tracing a route from Rockville to Silver Spring, and appears to be making a beeline for the nation's capital.
These shootings that were taking place were causing such terror. When things started happening just 1 year after 9/11, people were pretty much on eggshells.
The D.C. suburb of Montgomery County, Maryland, is a relatively peaceful area.
There are nearly 1 million people living in this county, which is one of the most affluent in the United States. So when you drive through, you'll see government offices, scientific research facilities, and even business campuses.
But by 10 a.m. on October 3rd, 2001, Montgomery County Police find themselves investigating 4 unexplained shootings.
Their homicide rate just more than tripled in a couple of hours. There didn't seem to be any discrimination. It was men, it was women.
People pumping gas, people in the parking lots at their local shopping center.
As investigators begin connecting the dots between the shootings, they discover there had actually been a 5th victim killed the night before.
The first thing that they found out is that there was a manager at a craft store that reported that she had heard a gunshot and a bullet broke her front window as she was closing up for the day.
No one was injured, but when police searched the store, they found a high-caliber rifle bullet. And little more than a half hour later, the shooter struck again. At 6 p.m., a 55-year-old program analyst named James Martin had been shot and killed outside a grocery store in nearby Wheaton, Maryland.
Just a guy stopping on his way home from work to pick up some groceries. People around him initially thought the man had had a heart attack and had fallen over.
As with the other crime scenes, no one had seen the shooter, and now investigators believe they know why.
When you don't have witnesses who observed the shooting, one of the things that you can attempt is trajectory. We could tell that some of these shots were being taken from a distance.
You're talking about a sniper who used a high-caliber rifle to pick people off. That had to be terrifying to investigators.
Of course, the first thing you think is this a terror attack? What's happening?
So far, all of the shootings have occurred in suburban Maryland. But on the night of October 3rd, the sniper arrives in the nation's capital.
If you were living in the city, you were seeing reports of the shooting throughout the day. You were hearing about it, and suddenly it's getting closer and closer. And then it's here. The shooter is in D.C.
Just after 9:15 p.m., the D.C. Metropolitan Police receive a 911 call about a shooting on Georgia Avenue, about a block inside the city limits. The victim is 72-year-old Pascal Charlot.
He was a Haitian immigrant whose family said he came here to really live out the American dream.
Pascal was a retired carpenter, shot while crossing the street at Georgia Avenue and Calmia Road.
Pascal Charlot was literally walking on a main street here in Washington, D.C., and he became D.C.'s first sniper victim.
He wasn't just the first victim shot inside of D.C., he was also the first black victim. So there was a lot of fear in the community because there just didn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to any of it.
There was this gradual realization, I think, that any one of us could be a target.
Pascal is pronounced dead less than an hour later.
Of course, Metropolitan Police Department now is going to run the lead on that shooting in the district. But it was very, very obvious from the onset. This was connected.
The next morning, on October 4th, Maryland's chief medical examiner performs autopsies. He's able to extract multiple bullet fragments from the victims, which police hope they can use to identify the weapon.
This case was fast-tracked. Bullets that were being recovered from bodies, from the scenes, were all taken to ATF. They very quickly were able to determine they were .223 caliber weapon, and it was most likely a Bushmaster rifle.
The .223 caliber is a military-grade weapon of choice, and the reason for that is it hits off of bone and fragments and tears through the human body.
In this case, he used a .223 rifle, which means that he's very skilled. He wasn't concerned about recoil, because there's always recoil with a high-caliber rifle such as this. We're dealing with somebody that is a skilled marksman, and they're motivated.
If these were semi-trained, military style, there was a shooter, there was a spotter, they had an exit route, which obviously from the shootings, nobody had seen anything. We're looking for this white van. Somebody's driving it, somebody's shooting. It did eliminate that we had multiple sniper teams because the same rifle was being used for all of these victims.
Investigators now set their sights on a team of 2 snipers working together. In just over 24 hours, 6 people have been murdered, but the snipers are just getting started.
Those of us in law enforcement have never seen anything like it, this kind of terror.
These are some folks that have some dedication to whatever their sick mission is. This isn't going to stop until we stop them.
The terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001 shook the nation to its core. But for the DMV, a daily terror was just beginning.
But I think people forget that a week later, the anthrax scare started. There were CEOs and members of Congress that were receiving suspicious anonymous envelopes with a white substance in them. They ended up having to lock the buildings down. 5 people died who handled the letters. So when you talk about the DC sniper, you have to remember that the city had spent an entire year living in fear.
It's only been a year since the residents of Washington, D.C. witnessed a plane crash into the Pentagon in the attacks of 9/11. And now the entire DMV is under siege once again, this time by unknown snipers.
In the wake of 9/11, it was the first domestic terrorism of a serial killing kind.
It turned panic into scared to the point of no one would move. Now no one is on the street. We're talking the nation's capital, no cars moving. Schools went into lockdown.
Investigators have linked all 6 shootings to the same gun, but they still have no idea who is pulling the trigger.
These shootings were not limited to any sex or any race. There were men shot, there were women shot, there were Caucasian people shot, African Americans being shot.
They didn't travel in the same circles. There was no connection.
And that was very frustrating for those of us in law enforcement.
While Maryland and D.C. police coordinate their investigations, the snipers strike again. 2:30 p.m. on October 4th, 2002, one day after the sniper attacks began, police in nearby Fredericksburg, Virginia, respond to a shooting at a local craft store.
Caroline Sewell was shot while she was putting her items in the back of her van. She was airlifted to Fairfax County and operated on immediately, and unfortunately was one of the survivors.
Caroline becomes the 7th person shot in less than 48 hours.
This was a really interesting crime scene in that there had already been a Michaels on October 2nd, the day before the big shooting spree.
Investigators are looking for connections between any of the victims. They're also looking at the locations of the shootings. Is it a coincidence that these shootings were happening at gas stations and convenience stores?
Is there some motivation here that someone is mad at this particular business? Is this a employee that's been fired?
The same day, a multi-jurisdictional task force of city, state, and federal agencies is created to locate and stop the killings.
The FBI, United States Marshals, ATF, DEA agents. If they were within 75 miles of Washington, D.C., they were being brought in to work this case.
This was the largest response to a serial killer in U.S. history. We had over 60 law enforcement entities here in the DMV. You have hundreds of investigators running out hundreds of leads.
Profilers were talking about different profiles, and one of the things that came up was a white male, possibly military history.
We know we're dealing with a high-powered .223 caliber rifle. We're tracking down anybody that owned a rifle, had even thought about owning a rifle. We're tracking down anybody that's connected to any of these businesses where these crimes had occurred.
The task force is also searching for a vehicle spotted near the scene of the third shooting.
We're tracking down everybody that owned a white van, everybody that's rented a white van in the last 6 months.
You don't realize how many white panel vans there are until you start looking for them. There are hundreds of thousands of white panel vans out there.
The task force also begins to hold regular press briefings to share information and enlist the public's help. Comes and goes without incident, causing everyone to wonder, did the shooters decide to stop, or was this the calm before the storm?
The feeling was, okay, maybe this is over. Still a problem because we got to catch these guys, but there was this feeling of, okay, we've gotten through something awful.
But on Monday, their worst fears are realized when the snipers pick a new target and amplifies the DMV's fear to a whole new level.
Then a few days later, I think it was October 7th, a child was shot.
After 7 shootings in 3 days, everyone living in the DMV is on edge. But things are about to get even worse when another call comes in from Prince George County in Maryland.
Up until that point, all the victims were adults. But on October the 7th, the 8th victim, Iran Brown, was shot outside of his school.
The snipers moved to Benjamin Tasker Middle School.
It was a regular day. I was actually suspended from the school bus, and my aunt had to take me to and from school. She let me out in front of the school, and it was a loud bang, like a grenade went off. I fell back like the movies where you just see blood just gushing out and just pouring all over the place. And I actually was covering my wound, fighting for air, praying. My aunt is calling me to the car, and we get in, and at this point, I'm losing blood.
Iran's aunt immediately rushes him to the nearest hospital.
I can recall my aunt running inside to get help, and I'm just sitting in the car, just still trying to stay alive, just fighting for my life. And I see everyone rushing back with a wheelchair, and I can recall being wheeled inside all the way up to them putting me on the table and cutting my clothes off.
Miraculously, he survives. After emergency surgery, he is put into a medically induced coma to heal.
I had to learn how to walk again. I had to learn how to talk again.
The shooting of Iran Brown became even more personal to the law enforcement. It was really emotional, and I've always said that day, it changed everything in my career. I'd never had a victim that was a youth.
Of course, when a child goes down, it is a full, all-out response. If it wasn't personal before, it is now.
While searching the crime scene, the task force finds a piece of evidence near the school.
The investigators found a spot in the woods with a shell casing. And next to the shell casing was a plastic bag with a tarot card in it
I don't know a lot about tarot cards. I know fortune tellers use them. Each card has a separate meaning to it. This card was the Death's Head card that represented death. And on this card was written very sloppy, almost childish handwriting, "Call me God." That tells me we're dealing with someone now that really is way, way out there. These killers now have a God complex.
Investigators also find a pen they believe was used to write the note. All of this new evidence is sent to a crime lab for testing. When the media learns of this newest development, panic in the D.C. area reaches a new high.
Call me God, that's a pretty dramatic thing to leave out there. It kind of elevated it into this, okay, we're dealing with a twisted person with their own agenda, whatever that is.
Clearly, this wasn't going to stop. This was a psychopath playing cat and mouse with law enforcement.
Over the next 4 days, the snipers killed 2 more people. Both attacks, Dean Myers and Kenneth Bridges, take place at gas stations in Virginia.
We're seeing a pattern. They're hitting at gas stations, parking lots, schools, very public.
People were being much more cautious. I saw people ducking down behind their cars as they're actually filling their gas tanks.
But that doesn't stop the snipers. On October 14th, 47-year-old FBI analyst Linda Franklin is shot in the parking lot of a Home Depot.
That was the first time that a member of law enforcement had been targeted, but I believe that he was unaware that Linda Franklin worked for the FBI.
We're supposed to protect the herd. These were easy targets. They weren't going to be able to put up any struggle, any fight.
On October 19th, 37-year-old Jeffrey Hopper is shot in Ashland, Virginia, about 90 miles south of Washington, D.C.
He and his wife were traveling from north of D.C. down to Georgia, and they had made the deliberate decision to wait till they got well south of where these shootings were going on before they would pull over and have some dinner. They pulled over down outside of Richmond and went into a Ponderosa to have their meal. As they left the restaurant, a shot rang out.
Thankfully, Hopper is not killed. When investigators search the area, they find another shell casing and another message from the snipers.
Go in the woods, sure enough, find the casing. We also find a note in a plastic bag.
If y'all want us to stop, give us $10 million, we'll go away.
And they want it put on a ATM card. So that also tells you they're not real bright.
But I think most chilling from the note this time, it said, P.S. Your children are not safe anywhere, anytime.
However, this time the serial killers have given investigators a clue they can follow up on.
It took all of 30 seconds for us to discover that this ATM card had been stolen from a bus driver in Texas several weeks before. So that starts the FBI on a trail. Now we can start tracking. Also, in the letter, they mentioned that they tried to call and confess, but they were being ignored. So therefore, some of these killings and shootings were our fault because of our incompetence.
Sure enough, investigators find a call to one of the tip lines made 2 days before.
He said, you need to look at the shootings in Montgomery, Alabama. There were 2 women that were shot, and that was us.
The D.C. sniper attacks were unique in many ways. One of the most significant was the number of law enforcement agencies working together to catch the killers who were terrorizing Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia.
When a terrorist act occurs, the information is originally disseminated by the FBI, then to other intelligence organizations. The advancement of technology and the response of law enforcement has improved. These days, you go on a crime spree. Because of cell phones and surveillance cameras everywhere, you're not getting away with it long.
The DMV area is now in the third week of an ongoing manhunt for the snipers terrorizing its streets. What began as a random series of shootings has turned into a deadly game of cat and mouse with law enforcement.
Not only do they have the God complex, but they feel invincible. They're to the point now where they're taunting the police.
They even called into the tip line that was set up for any information about the shooters.
The caller, who was at that time unidentified, said, "We're the people you're looking for, and if you don't believe us, call Montgomery, Alabama police."
Task force investigators contact Montgomery County Police to verify the information. One crime immediately stands out. 2 women had been shot during a liquor store robbery on September 21st.
Police officers arrived on scene quickly, and they observed a young man over the bodies. He was armed with a small caliber handgun, and he had a firearms catalog. When officers took chase, the suspect dropped what he was carrying and managed to get away. But they recovered this firearms catalog and the handgun. A latent fingerprint was recovered from that catalog. Unfortunately, police in Montgomery, Alabama ran it through a state system and did not get a hit.
This is a time before all the systems were linked. In other words, Maryland had their own system. Alabama had their own system.
But when investigators check the federal database, they come up with a match.
We got a hit to Bellingham, Washington through an INS immigrations record. We were able to identify a person, Lee Boyd Malvo, from that fingerprint.
Lee Malvo was a young Jamaican that had been snuck into the country and had been deported at least once. He's traced to being in contact with this guy by the name of John Muhammad. So now we have 2 names.
Muhammad was born John Allen Williams in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. After high school, he served in the Louisiana National Guard. Then in 1997, he converted to Islam, changed his name to Muhammad, and joined the Army, where he worked as an engineer. But his true skill was with the rifle.
Muhammad had earned the expert rifleman's badge on the M16. That's the Army's highest of 3 levels of basic marksmanship.
Muhammad and his wife Mildred raised 3 children in Washington state before he was deployed to Iraq during Operation Desert Storm. When he returned, he was a different man.
It would come out later that he was diagnosed with PTSD and was prone to fits of rage. It eventually led to his wife filing for divorce in 1999.
They ended up in a very nasty contested divorce and custody battle out on the West Coast. At one point, when Muhammad had a visitation, he left the country with the kids. Muhammad made trips on occasion to Antigua, and that's where he met a young man, Lee Boyd Malvo.
This kid who was sort of a juvenile runaway, lost soul from Jamaica, and taken him under his wing.
Muhammad eventually brought Malvo back to the U.S. with him, and they came in on the West Coast.
Upon his return to Washington state, Muhammad enrolled his children in school, which immediately set off alarms.
These children had been reported abducted. The authorities came in and took the kids out of school and took them back to Mildred and put them in Mildred's custody.
Afraid it would happen again, Mildred moved with her children to an undisclosed location in Maryland in October of 2001.
That makes Malvo the only family Muhammad really has left. As kind of a father-son thing, he decides he's going to teach Malvo how to shoot. But first, they need a gun. So they go into a store and steal a Bushmaster rifle.
Muhammad took Malvo to the home of his Army friend, Robert Holmes. And when they were at Robert Holmes' house, they did a lot of shooting. Muhammad taught Malvo how to zero in a sight on the Bushmaster. They did a lot of target practicing, shooting into a stump.
Holmes tells investigators that Malvo got so proficient with the rifle that he earned himself a nickname, Sniper.
We sent a couple of guys out to remove the entire stump.
They end up digging up some bullets that match the bullets that they have from the victims of the sniper shootings.
So now this search is on for John Muhammad and Lee Malvo. We did a nationwide name search through all available databases for registered vehicles.
John Allen Muhammad's name comes up. It turns out he's registered a vehicle, a blue Caprice, that he recently purchased and registered to an address in New Jersey.
We're focused on white vans. And we had already unknowingly given ourselves tunnel vision.
On October 23rd, 2001, a bolo with the sniper's descriptions and the plate number of the car are given to every law enforcement agency and media outlet in the country.
We saw these pictures and we realized, no, these aren't white guys. These are black men. And I remember everybody talking about, wow, talk about breaking a glass ceiling. Because now you have black people actually doing as serial killers.
The next morning, the car is spotted 50 miles north of D.C. Maryland state troopers are the first to arrive. After 3 weeks of evading police, the snipers are now the ones in the crosshairs.
We had a trooper blocking the entrance to the rest area. Another canine trooper had pulled up. We didn't know where the snipers were. But if we had to, the three of us would just bum rush that car and take them down.
In the early morning hours of October 24th, 2002, investigators have finally caught up with the snipers who have been terrorizing the D.C. area for weeks. A multi-jurisdictional task force storms the rest stop where Lee Boy Malvo and John Muhammad are hiding.
John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boy Malvo were asleep in the car.
We're able to quietly sneak in, and it was textbook. They were taken down without firing a shot. Yeah, I think they were probably both very disappointed that they didn't go down in a blaze of glory. I will take that to my grave. I believe that that's what they were hoping to do. And if there's any satisfaction at all, we were at least able to deprive them of that.
When investigators searched the blue Caprice, they discovered the pair had been using it as a mobile sniper's nest.
There was a notch in the back of the trunk from where shots had been taken. There was ammunition. There were even voice recorders in that vehicle where they had been practicing their extortion demands.
Yeah, I believe it was either an FBI or an ATF lab guy pulls that Bushmaster rifle out of from underneath the back seat. It makes it safe by pulling back the receiver. And I can never forget this. I visibly saw the little brass bullet and cartridge do its little circle in the air as it come down and tinkled on the pavement. And I knew at that point, we got them. This nightmare is over.
At first, both men remained silent about their crimes. But after a few weeks in police custody, Lee Malvo confesses.
Except Muhammad was using the scope, which we recovered in the car, and he was watching for police. He was looking at viable targets. He was honing in on the target, and then Malvo would set up and actually take the shot.
As Muhammad's trial approaches, prosecutors discover a potential motive.
This is a man with PTSD and anger issues, and his wife was divorcing him and was taking the children away. So these could have been triggers that led him to commit these crimes.
Muhammad told Robert Holmes, I'm going to find Mildred.
She had disappeared, as it turned out, into Maryland with the children, and he wanted to find and get his children.
Investigators believe he found out where Mildred was from her friend.
Muhammad said, I just found out where Mildred is. She's back east in Maryland somewhere, so we're leaving to go there.
But before they left, Lee Malvo gunned down the friend's 21-year-old niece, Kenya Cook, on February 16th. She is believed to be his first victim. The pair then headed east towards Maryland.
As they're coming across country, they're pulling these robberies. They've got the Bushmaster. They pulled a robbery in a couple of places.
Between February and September of 2002, 7 people were killed and 7 others wounded before the shooting spree in the DMV area even began.
He never did kill his wife, which makes this whole thing even more bizarre because Muhammad wanted to make his wife look like she was the victim of a serial killer.
Motives are strange, as I think is frequently the case when you have people who are serial killers.
In October of 2003, John Allen Muhammad stands trial in Virginia.
I attended the trial, and I can remember looking him in the eyes, and he was just, the look that he gave me was, he was just as if he didn't finish the job. He just looked like he was upset that I was still alive.
The prosecution calls more than 130 witnesses and introduces more than 400 pieces of evidence. But the defense insists there is no proof Muhammad shot anyone.
It was Melville's DNA, it was Melville's fingerprints.
Melville was the one that confessed, and not Muhammad.
But it turns out Muhammad did leave evidence at one of the crime scenes, the shooting of 13-year-old Iron Brown.
He was the one that wrote the note on the tarot card, and his DNA was on the pen.
It was critical in this case because it was the only DNA from Muhammad from any crime scene, from anything in the case.
On November 17th, 2003, Muhammad is found guilty and later sentenced to death. Meanwhile, Lee Malvo's trial is just getting started in nearby Chesapeake, Virginia.
The biggest obstacle in that case was, I think, Malvo's youth.
The defense team presented him as a child.
Despite his confession, Malvo pleads not guilty, claiming he was under Muhammad's control. The jury doesn't agree. On December 18th, 2003, they find Malvo guilty. He is sentenced to life in prison.
I understand the fact that he was 17 years old, but I believe he knew what he was doing.
That 17-year-old was a psychopath. You could see it in his face and in his eyes, and that was his motivation. He was a psychopath that John Muhammad was able to utilize for his means.
Two of the most notorious serial killers in the nation's history had finally been stopped. But the terrifying 3-week shooting spree would leave its mark on the DMV for decades to come.
I think the things that occurred in the early 2000s, the 9/11 attacks, the anthrax scare, the sniper killings, really made us a little more cynical. We're all aware of, on any given day, anything dramatic and bad and awful can happen.
In spite of tragedies, in spite of hardships, in spite of these hard times, DC is resilient. DC bounces back, DC fights back, and it remains the strong nation's capital that it is and always was.
Mana em te fin por ik, ik moet hier op de front dat tot wat